In the shadows of a Texas mansion, a confrontation erupts that will shatter the foundation of the Whitmore family forever. When Logan Whitmore discovers his cleaning lady defending his elderly mother against his picture-perfect fiancé, he makes a devastating mistake that sets in motion a chain of shocking revelations. What dark secrets has the Whitmore family buried for 12 years? Why does his mother keep saying she saved me when referring to their quiet, hard-working housekeeper? And why is Matthias, a non-verbal autistic boy from the wrong side of town, drawing pictures of Logan's father from decades ago? The answer will leave you breathless. Follow this heart-wrenching story of betrayal, redemption, and the true meaning of family that proves blood isn't always thicker than water. Sometimes, it's the invisible ties that bind us most powerfully. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from to join our community of storytellers who believe that the most extraordinary tales are often hidden in plain sight. The Whitmore mansion kitchen smelled of lavender and fried onions, an odd combination that somehow suited the strange tension hanging in the air that evening. Located in the rolling hills of East Texas, the estate stood as a monument to old money and new secrets. Leticia Alvarez, 41, scrubbed the Italian marble floor for the third time that night, her knees aching against the hard surface. The frayed edges of her once white apron told the story of 1,000 such cleanings. Her dark eyes remained downcast, focusing on a stubborn spot near the sub-zero refrigerator that cost more than her car. Outside in the sweltering Texas heat, her son Matthias waited in their 2005 Honda Civic, windows cracked despite the broken air conditioning. At 12 years old, with tousled black hair and eyes that seemed to see everything yet connect with nothing, he hadn't spoken a word in his life. Autism had taken his voice, but sharpened his perception. Leticia had no choice but to bring him tonight. Her usual babysitter had canceled last minute, and this was her third cleaning job of the day. The Alvarez family couldn't afford to lose even one night's pay. Make sure everything sparkles, especially the East Wing. Mrs. Whitmore is particular about the floors there. The house manager had instructed with the clinical detachment of someone who had never scrubbed a floor herself. In the main hall, crystal champagne flutes clinked against each other like wind chimes in a hurricane. Logan Whitmore, 35, heir to the Whitmore Resorts empire that dotted the coastlines of 3 continents, stood tall in a custom Tom Ford suit, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. His smile, however, never quite reached his eyes as he clinked glasses with business associates and distant relatives. "To new beginnings," he toasted, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of a man born into power. Beside him stood Ashley Turner, 29, her diamond engagement ring catching the light from every angle, intentionally so, as she subtly adjusted her hand for the smartphones documenting her triumph. With 3 million Instagram followers watching her ascent from fashion blogger to future hotel heiress wife, every gesture was calculated. Her white designer dress hugged curves that seemed engineered for maximum social media engagement. "Darling, your mother seems tired," Ashley whispered to Logan, her glossy lips barely moving, perfect teeth flashing in the rehearsed smile that had launched 1,000 sponsored posts. "Perhaps we should wrap this up soon." Margaret Whitmore sat in an antique wheelchair near the grand fireplace, her once commanding presence now diminished by age and something else, something that clouded her blue eyes with confusion. At 72, the matriarch's silver hair was still perfectly coiffed, her posture still regal despite her frailty. She clutched an ornate cane with trembling fingers. "The letter," Margaret suddenly said, her voice cracking through the polite murmur of conversation. "I need to find the letter before it's too late." Ashley quickly moved to Margaret's side, placing a manicured hand on the older woman's shoulder, squeezing just slightly harder than necessary. "Don't worry about any letters tonight, Mother Whitmore," she cooed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear her term of endearment. "Tonight is about celebrating Logan and me." Margaret's eyes darted around the room, a flash of lucidity cutting through the fog. "You don't understand. She needs to know." "More champagne?" Ashley interrupted, signaling a server with a snap of her fingers. Leticia, emptying a small trash bin in the corner, caught Margaret's eye for just a moment. The older woman froze, her mouth slightly open, as though seeing a ghost. Suddenly, muffled shouting erupted from the east wing of the house. Leticia dropped the trash bag, her body moving before her mind could process the danger. She raced down the corridor, her practical shoes squeaking against the freshly polished floors. She skidded to a stop at the entrance to the auxiliary kitchen, the scene before her unfolding like a nightmare. Ashley had Margaret cornered against a marble countertop, one hand gripping the elderly woman's wrist with white-knuckled force. "Where did you put it?" Ashley hissed, her perfect facade crumbling into something ugly and desperate. "I know you've been hiding things, you confused old woman." "Please, I don't know what you're talking about," Margaret whimpered, trying to pull away, her frail body no match for the younger woman's strength. "You're going to ruin everything with your senile nonsense," Ashley continued, pushing Margaret harder against the counter edge. "Just because you can't remember what day it is doesn't mean—" "Stop!" Leticia couldn't contain herself any longer. She rushed forward, placing herself between the two women, gently holding Margaret's arm to stabilize her. "You're hurting her." Time seemed to slow as heavy footsteps approached from behind. Leticia turned to see Logan Whitmore standing in the doorway, his face transforming from confusion to rage as he took in the scene. His mother half collapsed against the counter, the cleaning lady gripping her arm, Ashley's mascara slightly smudged from exertion. The silence that followed was deafening. It was Ashley who broke it, her voice cracking with manufactured distress. "Logan, thank God you're here." She rushed to his side, tears already forming perfectly at the corners of her eyes. "This woman, she attacked your mother. I tried to stop her, but she—" "That's not true," Leticia protested, her accent thickening with panic. "Your mother was being—" "Get out!" Logan cut her off, his voice cold as steel. "Get out of my house right now." Margaret tried to speak, her lips forming words that wouldn't come, her mind struggling to organize her thoughts fast enough to intervene. Wait, she was helping, but Logan wasn't listening. His focus was entirely on his mother's apparent distress and Ashley's performance of shock and concern. "I'm calling security," he said, reaching for his phone. Leticia backed away, tears welling in her eyes but refusing to fall. 12 years of working for the Whitmore family, of arriving early and staying late, of perfect silence and invisible service, all erased in an instant. "Mr. Whitmore, please," she tried once more. "Out," his voice echoed through the kitchen. With trembling hands, Leticia removed her apron and placed it neatly on the counter, a final act of dignity. She walked out without another word, head held high despite the tears now streaming down her cheeks. Outside, Matthias was still awake in the car, his fingers tracing patterns on the foggy window. He looked up at his mother's tear-streaked face with knowing eyes that understood more than words could express. He reached for her hand as she slid into the driver's seat. As they drove away from the glittering mansion, Leticia's hand instinctively went to the pocket of her uniform, where an aged yellow envelope crinkled beneath her fingers. Across the front, in faded blue ink, was written, "Margaret Whitmore." The secret she had carried for 12 long years suddenly felt heavier than ever. The following day dawned with the particular heaviness that only small Texas towns can produce, a thick blanket of humidity and whispers. Millbrook, population 4,287, was the kind of place where reputations were as delicate as the antique china displayed in glass cabinets throughout its historic homes. By 9 a.m., every cashier, barista, and receptionist was exchanging hushed snippets about the scene at the Whitmore estate. In the back room of Green's Market, the town's oldest grocery store, Leticia Alvarez methodically scrubbed produce bins with bleach and a worn yellow sponge. Her eyes were hollow from a sleepless night, dark circles standing out against her olive skin. This job paid less than the Whitmore cleaning gig, but Mr. Green had always been kind enough to let Matthias stay in the storage area during her shifts. Today, her son sat cross-legged in the corner, meticulously arranging empty yogurt containers by color, blue, then green, then white, a pattern that seemed to calm him. "Leticia?" A gentle voice broke through her mechanical cleaning rhythm. She looked up to find Father Thomas in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. At 68, the parish priest had served Millbrook for over 30 years and knew everyone's business, though he pretended otherwise during confession. "Good morning, Father," Leticia replied, quickly wiping her hands on her faded uniform. "I'm sorry, but I won't be able to help with the church fundraiser this weekend." Father Thomas waved away her apology. "I'm not here about that. Word spreads fast in Millbrook. Margaret Whitmore's nurse attends Thursday morning mass, and she mentioned there was an incident last night." Leticia's hands trembled slightly as she placed the sponge down. "It wasn't what they're saying. I would never hurt Mrs. Whitmore. She was being—" Her voice cracked, betraying the composure she'd been maintaining for Matthias's sake. "I've known you for 12 years, Leticia. Since the day you arrived in town with a newborn and grief in your eyes." Father Thomas moved closer, lowering his voice. What really happened? For a moment, Leticia nearly broke down, nearly poured out the entire complicated history that bound her to the Whitmores. Instead, she glanced at Matthias and took a steadying breath. She recognized the envelope. Leticia finally whispered, "But not me. Not after all this time." Father Thomas's bushy gray eyebrows knitted together in confusion, but before he could ask for clarification, Mr. Green called from the front. "Father, your order's ready." The priest squeezed Leticia's shoulder. "Come by the rectory when you're ready to talk. Some burdens aren't meant to be carried alone." After he left, Leticia returned to her scrubbing, the mindless motion barely masking the storm in her mind. Across town at the Whitmore mansion, Logan sat alone in his father's former study, nursing a glass of bourbon despite the early hour. The heavy drapes were drawn against the morning light, casting the mahogany-paneled room in shadow. On the desk before him lay a stack of documents, medical assessments with clinical phrases like progressive cognitive decline and early-onset dementia. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, expecting Ashley with her usual breakfast smoothie and social media schedule. Instead, Elena, his mother's longtime nurse, entered with a worried expression that deepened the lines around her mouth. "Mr. Whitmore, your mother is asking for the cleaning lady again. She's quite agitated this morning." Logan sighed and rubbed his temples. "Did you give her the medication?" "Yes, but she's been repeating the same phrase for the past hour. She saved me. I thought you should know." "She saved me?" Logan repeated, puzzled. "What does that mean?" Elena shrugged. "She won't explain further. But sir, I've cared for your mother for 3 years now. Mrs. Whitmore has good days and bad, but I've never seen her this fixated on something." Logan dismissed the nurse with a promise to check on his mother soon. After Elena left, he poured another finger of bourbon and stared at the family portrait hanging above the fireplace. His father, William, imposing and austere. His mother, Margaret, elegant and composed. And himself at 18, already being groomed to take over the empire. "What are you hiding, mother?" he murmured to the portrait. His thoughts were interrupted by Ashley's entrance. She floated in wearing designer loungewear, her hair perfectly tousled in that way that took precisely 45 minutes to achieve. "Darling, we need to discuss your mother," she announced, perching on the edge of his desk. "After last night's episode, I think it's time to consider that specialized facility in Houston. The one with the private gardens I showed you?" Logan frowned. "She's having a difficult period, but this is her home." "Logan," Ashley placed a manicured hand over his, "your mother attacked a staff member last night. She's becoming a liability. What if the cleaning woman decides to sue?" "Leticia, she's worked for us for years. She wouldn't—" "People change when money's involved," Ashley interrupted. "Besides, your focus needs to be on the Palm Springs acquisition, not babysitting." Logan pulled his hand away, uneasy with Ashley's eagerness to ship his mother off. "I'll think about it." Later that afternoon, while searching for a misplaced contract in the library, Logan stumbled upon an old family photo album he hadn't seen in years. Flipping through its pages, he noticed something odd, a ragged edge where a page had been carefully torn out. As he examined the album closer, the house phone rang with an unlisted number. When he answered, the line went dead immediately. That evening, as Logan passed the rarely used music room, he froze at the threshold. His mother sat at the grand piano, the one nobody had played since his grandmother died, her fingers trembling over the yellowed keys as she picked out a haunting melody. The tune was vaguely familiar, something from his childhood perhaps, but he couldn't place it. What shocked him most were the tears streaming down her face as she played, her expression more lucid than it had been in months. When she noticed him watching, she abruptly stopped, her momentary clarity dissolving back into confusion. "Logan, is that you or William?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "It's Logan, Mother. Your son." Margaret nodded slowly, then whispered something that sent a chill down his spine. Some secrets should stay buried, but others need to breathe before it's too late. As Logan helped his mother back to her room, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Whitmore mansion held more secrets than he ever imagined, and that somehow, Leticia Alvarez held the key to unlocking them all. 3 days after the incident, Leticia stood at her kitchen sink, scrubbing dried spaghetti sauce from a pot with such intensity that her knuckles turned white. The tiny two-bedroom apartment she rented on the east side of Millbrook, the part of town tourists never saw, was silent except for the rhythmic scratching of steel wool against metal and the soft hum of the old box fan propped in the window. Matthias had finally fallen asleep after hours of agitation. He'd been more sensitive than usual, picking up on her distress like a radio antenna detecting distant signals. The envelope from her pocket now sat on the scratched formica table, its edges worn soft from years of handling. She'd carried it for so long that it had become part of her, a talisman of both hope and pain. Enough, Leticia whispered to herself, setting down the pot with a decisive clunk. No more waiting. She dried her hands on a threadbare dish towel and picked up the envelope, feeling its weight, so light yet so heavy with consequences. With trembling fingers, she dialed a number she'd memorized years ago but never had the courage to call. "Whitmore residence," answered a voice she didn't recognize. "I need to speak with Mrs. Margaret Whitmore," Leticia said, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might be audible through the phone. "Please tell her it's about the St. Michael's Hospital records from 2011. The line went silent for a long moment before the voice replied. "One moment, please." Leticia waited, counting her heartbeats, reaching 47 before a different voice came on the line. Younger, feminine, instantly recognizable. "This is Ashley Turner. Mrs. Whitmore is not accepting calls." "Who is this?" The sharp edge in her tone could have cut glass. "It's Leticia Alvarez. I have something that belongs to Mrs. Whitmore. Something important." "The only important thing," Ashley replied coldly, "is that you stay away from this family. If you're thinking of some kind of extortion scheme, I should warn you that the Whitmores have very good lawyers." "This isn't about money," Leticia insisted, her voice strengthening with resolve. "It's about truth. Please, I just need 5 minutes with Mrs. Whitmore." "The truth?" Ashley's laugh was brittle. "The truth is that you're a disgruntled ex-employee trying to take advantage of an elderly woman's condition. Stay away or you'll regret it." The line went dead. Leticia stared at the phone in her hand, then at the envelope on the table. After 12 years of silence, she couldn't wait any longer. She glanced at the digital clock on the microwave. 9:47 p.m. "Mrs. Ortiz," she said into the phone after dialing another number. "Can you come watch Matthias? It's an emergency." An hour later, Leticia stood at the service entrance of the Whitmore mansion, the envelope clutched in her hand like a shield. The security guard, new since her dismissal, regarded her suspiciously. "I need to see Mrs. Whitmore," she stated firmly, despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Please tell Mr. Logan I'm here. Tell him it's about why his mother keeps saying she saved me." The guard's eyebrows rose slightly, but he picked up his radio and relayed the message. After a tense wait that felt like hours, the heavy wooden door opened to reveal Logan himself, his expression unreadable in the dim porch light. "You have some nerve showing up here," he said, but there was more exhaustion than anger in his voice. "I know," Leticia acknowledged, meeting his gaze directly. "But this can't wait any longer." She held up the envelope. "Your mother has been asking about this, hasn't she?" Logan studied her face for a long moment before stepping aside. 5 minutes, and I'll be present the entire time." As Leticia followed him through the servants' corridor, a path she knew better than the halls of her own apartment building, she felt Ashley's icy stare before she saw her. The younger woman stood at the intersection of the main hallway, arms crossed over an expensive silk robe. "What is she doing here?" Ashley demanded, her voice echoing against the marble floors. "She claims to have something my mother has been asking about," Logan replied, his tone flat. "You can't be serious," Ashley hissed, moving to block their path. "After what happened at the engagement party." "That's why I'll be with them the entire time," Logan said with finality, gesturing for Leticia to continue following him. Ashley's perfect features contorted momentarily before smoothing back into a practiced smile. "Of course, darling. I'll join you." The trio made their way to Margaret's private sitting room in tense silence. The elderly woman was awake despite the late hour, sitting in a wing-back chair by the window, staring out at the moon-dappled garden. Her silver hair hung loose around her shoulders, giving her the appearance of fragility that her rigid posture contradicted. "Mother," Logan said softly, "you have a visitor." Margaret turned slowly, her eyes widening as they fell on Leticia. For a heartbeat, there was no recognition, and Leticia's hope began to crumble. Then Margaret's gaze dropped to the envelope in her hands. "The letter," she whispered, her voice suddenly stronger. You kept it all this time? Leticia nodded, stepping forward to place the envelope in Margaret's trembling hands. I never opened it, she said quietly. I promised I wouldn't. Margaret stared at the envelope, tears welling in her eyes. She looked up at Leticia with a flash of lucidity so powerful it transformed her face, years of confusion melting away like snow in sunlight. You're alive, she breathed, reaching out to touch Leticia's cheek with paper-thin fingers. All this time, you never told him. Logan moved closer, confusion etched across his features. Told who what? Mother, what's going on? But Margaret's moment of clarity was already fading, her eyes clouding once more as she clutched the envelope to her chest. William must never know, she murmured. He wouldn't understand. William? Logan frowned. Dad has been dead for 3 years, Mother. Leticia backed away, overwhelmed by the emotion in Margaret's eyes. This wasn't how she had imagined this moment. Not with Ashley watching with calculated interest, not with Logan's suspicious glare, not with Margaret's mind slipping in and out of the present. I should go, she whispered, turning toward the door. Wait, Logan commanded. You don't get to drop a bomb like this and just leave. What did my mother mean? What's in that envelope? Leticia paused at the threshold, looking back at Margaret, who was now humming softly to herself, the envelope still clutched against her heart. Ask her, Leticia said simply. When she's ready, she'll tell you. Without another word, she slipped past Ashley and hurried down the corridor, her footsteps quickening until she was nearly running by the time she reached the service entrance. The night air hit her lungs like salvation as she gasped in deep breaths, leaning against her car for support. Later that night, in the quiet of her bedroom with Matthias sleeping soundly across the hall, Margaret's words echoed in Leticia's mind. You never told him. The weight of that question pressed down on her chest like a stone. Across town, in the darkness of her suite, Margaret Whitmore sat at an antique writing desk, penning a letter in shaky handwriting. The words came slowly, painfully as she fought against the fog in her mind. Halfway through, she stopped, unable to remember what she wanted to say next. With a sigh of frustration, she folded the unfinished letter and sealed it in a fresh envelope, writing for Logan on the front. Then she picked up the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Jenkins, she said when the line connected. It's Margaret Whitmore. I need you to come to the house tomorrow. It's time to change my will. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Whitmore mansion's east-facing breakfast room, catching dust motes that danced in the air like miniature constellations. Logan sat alone at the massive oak table, absently stirring his black coffee as he stared at the chair where his mother usually sat. It had been empty for the past 2 mornings. After Leticia's unexpected visit, Margaret had retreated further into herself, refusing to leave her rooms except for brief supervised walks in the garden. The envelope that had caused such a stir remained clutched in her hands or hidden beneath her pillow, according to Elena. The soft click of Ashley's designer heels against the hardwood floor announced her arrival before she appeared in the doorway, immaculately dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit despite the early hour. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, highlighting the sharp angles of her face. You didn't come to bed last night, she observed, pouring herself a precise half-cup of coffee before adding exactly 1 teaspoon of organic agave syrup. Again, Logan didn't look up. I was reviewing the Palm Springs contracts. Until 3 a.m.? Ashley's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched skeptically. Or were you sitting outside your mother's door again? Hoping she'd explain what that cleaning woman was talking about. Logan's jaw tightened. The truth was he'd spent hours in his father's study, searching through old files and photographs for any connection between Leticia Alvarez and his family beyond her employment. He'd found nothing. Something isn't right, he said finally, meeting Ashley's gaze. That envelope meant something to my mother. You saw how she reacted. Ashley set her coffee cup down with a delicate clink. What I saw was a manipulative woman taking advantage of your mother's condition. Leticia worked here for years. She knows exactly which buttons to push. She leaned forward, her voice softening. Logan, darling, have you considered that this might be some kind of blackmail attempt? Maybe she found something embarrassing while cleaning and has been holding on to it. Blackmail? Logan frowned. Then why bring it directly to my mother with me present? And why not ask for money? To establish credibility first, Ashley replied smoothly. It's a classic con. She's probably waiting for you to approach her, desperate to know what's in that envelope. Then she names her price. She reached across the table to squeeze his hand. People like her always have an angle. Logan pulled his hand away, a subtle movement that didn't escape Ashley's notice. Her eyes narrowed slightly before her face relaxed back into concerned sympathy. "What do you know about her, really?" Ashley pressed. "Has she ever mentioned family beyond that strange son of hers? Friends? A past before Millbrook?" The question struck a nerve. Leticia had been cleaning the Whitmore home 3 times a week for over a decade, yet Logan realized he knew virtually nothing about her life. She had always been a shadow, moving quietly through their lives, present but invisible, until now. "I'm going to find out," he said abruptly, standing up. "Today." "What?" Ashley's composure slipped momentarily. "Logan, you can't seriously be thinking of going to see her. Not just see her. I'm going to get answers." He drained his coffee and set the cup down with finality. "If she's running some kind of scam, I'll know. And if she's not, if there's something about my mother I should know, then I need to find out what it is." Ashley's face hardened. "You're making a mistake. That woman," Logan interrupted, his voice steely, "is the only person who seems to know what's going on with my mother, and I intend to find out exactly what that is." An hour later, Logan's Aston Martin crawled through the east side of Millbrook, drawing curious stares from residents not accustomed to seeing luxury vehicles on their streets. He'd had to ask Elena for Leticia's address, a fact that added to his discomfort. 12 years of employment, and he'd never once thought about where she went when she left his home. The apartment building was a weathered 3-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging front porch. Logan parked across the street, suddenly uncertain. What exactly was he doing here? What did he expect to find? Before he could reconsider, the building's front door opened, and Leticia emerged with a young boy, her son, Matthias. Logan had seen the boy only once or twice over the years, usually waiting in Leticia's car during evening shifts. Now, in the harsh daylight, Logan was struck by how tall he'd grown, gangly limbs and a serious expression on his face that seemed too mature for his age. The boy moved with careful, deliberate steps, his gaze fixed on the ground as Leticia gently guided him toward an ancient Honda parked at the curb. Logan got out of his car and approached them, watching as Leticia tensed at the sight of him. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice carefully neutral as she positioned herself slightly in front of her son. "Leticia." Logan nodded, suddenly feeling foolish and intrusive. "I apologize for showing up unannounced. I was hoping we could talk." Matthias looked up then, his dark eyes meeting Logan's with unexpected directness. There was something in that gaze, something that made Logan's breath catch for reasons he couldn't articulate. "Matthias has therapy in half an hour," Leticia said, glancing at her watch. "But you can come inside for a few minutes." The apartment was small but meticulously clean, with worn furniture carefully arranged to maximize the limited space. What caught Logan's attention, however, were the walls, covered with an array of intricate pencil drawings, geometric patterns, detailed landscapes, and startlingly lifelike portraits filled nearly every inch of available wall space. "Did you do these?" Logan asked, gesturing to the artwork. "Matthias did," Leticia replied, a note of pride softening her voice. "He doesn't speak, but he sees everything." Logan moved closer to one particular drawing, a portrait of a woman with familiar eyes standing beside a man whose face made his heart stop. It was his father, William Whitmore, at least 25 years younger, his arm casually draped around the woman's shoulders. "What is this?" Logan demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "How does your son know what my father looked like when he was young?" Matthias flinched at the harsh tone, his hands beginning to flap anxiously at his sides. Leticia quickly guided her son to a small bedroom off the main living area, speaking to him in soft, soothing Spanish before returning to face Logan. "You shouldn't have come here," she said quietly, her eyes filled with a mixture of resignation and defiance. "Not like this." "What is going on?" Logan insisted, pointing to the drawing. "That's my father in that picture, a version of him I barely remember." Leticia took a deep breath, her shoulders squaring as though preparing for a blow. "You don't know what your father did," she said finally, each word carefully measured. "And you don't know what your mother tried to prevent." Logan stared at her, the implications of her words swirling in his mind like smoke, impossible to grasp fully. "What are you saying?" "I can't tell you more," Leticia replied, glancing toward the room where Matthias had disappeared. "Not now, not until I know Matthias will be safe." Safe from what? Logan stepped closer. My family has employed you for 12 years. If there's something I should know about my father, about my mother. 12 years, Leticia interrupted, a bitter smile touching her lips. And this is the first time you've been in my home, asked about my son, seen me as a person instead of just someone who cleans your floors. She moved toward the door, opening it in clear dismissal. You should go, Mr. Whitmore. Your mother has her reasons for keeping secrets. Maybe you should ask yourself why before you start demanding answers from others. Stunned by her directness, Logan found himself on the apartment landing before he could formulate a response. The door closed firmly behind him, leaving him alone with more questions than when he'd arrived. Meanwhile, back at the Whitmore mansion, Margaret sat at her writing desk, her trembling hand signing the final page of a document under the watchful eye of Jenkins, her attorney of 30 years. Ashley stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching through the crack in the door as the elderly lawyer carefully folded the papers into a leather portfolio. Are you sure about this change, Margaret? Jenkins asked softly. It's quite significant. More sure than I've been about anything in years, Margaret replied, a flicker of her old steel returning to her voice. Ashley's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as she silently retreated down the hallway, her mind racing with calculations and contingencies. The grandfather clock in the Whitmore mansion's main hall struck midnight, its deep, resonant chimes echoing through the otherwise silent house. Ashley Turner stood motionless in the darkened corridor, her silk nightgown whispering against her skin as she waited for the final note to fade. The moonlight streaming through the arched windows cast elongated shadows across the polished marble floor, transforming the familiar hallway into something alien and threatening. She glanced down at her phone, still no message from Logan. After their argument that morning, he'd disappeared for hours, returning only to lock himself in his father's study with a bottle of 30-year-old scotch. When she'd tried to enter, he'd asked for space in a tone that brooked no argument. Now, with the house asleep and Logan likely passed out across his father's desk, Ashley had other priorities. The door to Margaret's private study was locked, as she'd expected. Ashley slipped a small metal tool from her robe pocket, a gift from an ex-boyfriend with questionable connections, and inserted it into the antique keyhole. After a few careful manipulations, she felt the satisfying click of the lock disengaging. The room smelled of lavender and old paper, Margaret's signature scent mingling with decades of leather-bound books and important documents. Ashley moved with practiced stealth to the ornate mahogany desk, where she'd seen Jenkins and Margaret huddled over papers earlier that day. The moonlight wasn't sufficient for her search, so she risked turning on the small desk lamp, its warm glow confined to a tight circle on the polished wood surface. Where did you put it, you crafty old woman? Ashley muttered under her breath, methodically opening each drawer and rifling through its contents. The top drawers yielded nothing but stationery, old photographs, and various mementos that meant nothing to her. The bottom drawer on the right was locked. Ashley smiled thinly. Bingo. She was so focused on picking the second lock that she didn't hear the soft shuffling footsteps approaching until a quiet voice broke the silence. What are you doing in my study? Ashley whirled around, hastily shoving the lockpick into her pocket. Margaret Whitmore stood in the doorway, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her blue eyes startlingly clear and focused. Mother Whitmore, Ashley said, smoothly transitioning into her concerned future daughter-in-law persona. You startled me. I couldn't sleep and thought I might find something to read. She gestured vaguely at the bookshelves lining the walls. Margaret's gaze traveled from Ashley's face to the half-open drawers of her desk, her expression hardening. You're looking for the new will. The bluntness of the statement caught Ashley off guard. In the 3 years she'd been with Logan, she'd never heard Margaret speak so directly, especially not in recent months as her condition deteriorated. I don't know what you're talking about, Ashley attempted, but the lie sounded hollow even to her own ears. I may be losing my memories, Margaret said, stepping fully into the room, but I haven't lost my ability to recognize a predator when I see one. She moved toward the desk with surprising steadiness. You never loved my son. You saw an opportunity. The last unmarried Whitmore heir. A family fortune. A man too busy building his father's empire to notice your true nature. Ashley abandoned all pretense, her face transforming into something cold and calculating. And what is my true nature, Margaret? Ambitious? Strategic? Or is it simply that I refuse to apologize for wanting what you've had all these years? Security, power, respect. What I've had, Margaret replied softly, was a life built on compromise and regret. A husband who saw me as an accessory to his success. A son who grew up believing money could solve any problem. She reached the desk and placed her hand protectively over the locked drawer. I won't let you take the only chance I have to make things right. Ashley's perfectly curated composure cracked. Make things right? With that cleaning woman? What could she possibly mean to this family? Everything, Margaret whispered. She means everything. Something in Margaret's tone, absolute certainty mixed with profound sadness, sent a chill down Ashley's spine. Whatever secret bound Margaret to Leticia, it was powerful enough to threaten everything Ashley had worked for. You're confused, Ashley said, her voice hardening as she stepped toward the older woman. You don't know what you're saying or doing anymore. That's why Logan is considering the memory care facility. For your own protection. Logan would never send me away, Margaret countered, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. He already signed the preliminary paperwork. Ashley lied smoothly. After that scene with Leticia, he's concerned about your judgment. She reached for Margaret's arm. Let me help you back to bed. We can discuss this in the morning when you're thinking more clearly. Margaret jerked away from Ashley's touch. Get out of my study. Now. She reached for the desk lamp, perhaps intending to use it as a weapon if necessary, but in her haste she knocked it over. It crashed to the floor, the bulb shattering and plunging the room into darkness once more. In the sudden blackness, Ashley lunged forward, grabbing for the drawer handle. Margaret cried out, trying to stop her. The two women grappled in the moonlight, their shadows merging into a single writhing shape against the wall. It's mine, Margaret gasped, struggling with unexpected strength born of desperation. You're destroying everything, Ashley hissed back, shoving harder than she intended. There was a terrible moment of resistance, then nothing, as Margaret's fragile balance gave way. The elderly woman fell backward, her head striking the corner of the antique bookcase with a sickening thud before she crumpled to the floor like a marionette with cut strings. Margaret? Ashley whispered, frozen in place. When no response came, she fumbled for her phone, turning on its flashlight. Margaret lay motionless, a thin trickle of blood matting her silver hair where it had made contact with the bookcase. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and irregular. Oh God, Ashley murmured, panic rising in her throat. She knelt beside the unconscious woman, fingers searching for a pulse. It was there, but weak and thready. With shaking hands, Ashley dialed 911, her mind racing through scenarios and consequences. By the time the ambulance arrived, she had composed herself enough to deliver a convincing performance of the distraught future daughter-in-law, who had found her beloved mother-in-law collapsed in her study in the middle of the night. Logan, shaken from his drunken sleep by the commotion, barely had time to process what was happening before the paramedics were wheeling his mother out on a stretcher, an oxygen mask obscuring her pale face. What happened? He demanded, his voice hoarse as he gripped Ashley's shoulders. I heard a noise, she said, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. When I went to check, I found her on the floor. The doctor said it might be a stroke. 20 minutes later, as Logan paced the hospital waiting room, a small figure slipped through the emergency room doors. Leticia, still wearing a waitress uniform from her night job, her eyes wide with fear as she scanned the room until she spotted Logan. I heard about Mrs. Whitmore on my break, she explained breathlessly. Is she... critical condition, Logan replied, his face a mask of exhaustion and worry. They're running tests now. Leticia sank into a chair, tears streaming silently down her face. Logan, watching her raw grief, felt a strange mix of suspicion and compassion. Why are you here? He asked, his voice softer than he intended. Why do you care so much about my mother? Leticia looked up at him, her dark eyes swimming with emotions he couldn't decipher. She opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of a doctor in wrinkled scrubs. Mr. Whitmore? The doctor called. Your mother is stabilized but still unconscious. You can see her now, but only for a few minutes. As Logan followed the doctor through the swinging doors, he glanced back to see Leticia still sitting there, her lips moving in what appeared to be a silent prayer. In the sterile hospital room, Margaret lay small and broken among tubes and monitors. Logan approached cautiously, as if afraid his presence might somehow worsen her condition. Her skin was ashen against the white hospital sheets, the vivid bruise forming at her temple a violent splash of color in the otherwise monochromatic scene. He took her frail hand in his, surprised by how cold her fingers felt. "Mom," he whispered, using the informal address he'd abandoned somewhere in adolescence. "Can you hear me?" For a moment, there was nothing but the steady beep of the heart monitor. Then, miraculously, Margaret's eyelids fluttered. Her cracked lips parted slightly, and she spoke so softly that Logan had to lean closer to hear. "The letter," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "With Father Thomas. Protect her." "Protect who?" Logan asked urgently. "Mom, what happened tonight?" But Margaret had already slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving Logan with only fragments of a puzzle he couldn't begin to solve. St. Michael's Church stood on the outskirts of Millbrook, its weathered stone exterior and modest stained glass windows a testament to simpler times. The morning after Margaret's hospitalization, Logan pulled his car into the nearly empty gravel parking lot, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. 3 cups of hospital coffee had done little to clear the fog of exhaustion and confusion enveloping him. Margaret remained stable but unconscious, the doctors cautiously optimistic, but unwilling to make promises. Logan had spent the night in an uncomfortable chair beside her bed, Ashley periodically appearing with fresh coffee and concerned touches to his shoulder. Her attentiveness should have been comforting, but something in her eyes, a calculation behind the sympathy, had only intensified the uneasiness growing within him. His mother's whispered words echoed in his mind. "The letter, with Father Thomas. Protect her." The instruction was cryptic, but it was the most lucid thing Margaret had said in months. It had to mean something. Logan found Father Thomas in the church garden, methodically pruning roses despite the early hour. At 72, the priest moved with the careful precision of a man who had learned to work around his body's limitations rather than surrendering to them. His weathered face crinkled into a smile as he spotted Logan approaching. "Logan Whitmore," he said, removing his gardening gloves. "It's been quite some time since you graced our humble church. Not since your father's funeral, if memory serves." "Father." Logan nodded, suddenly feeling like the awkward teenager who had squirmed through mandatory Sunday services. "I need to speak with you about my mother." The priest's expression sobered immediately. "I heard about Margaret's accident. The congregation is praying for her recovery." He gestured toward a stone bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. "Please sit. You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," Logan admitted, sinking onto the cool stone. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, unsure how to begin. "This is going to sound strange, but before she lost consciousness, my mother mentioned a letter. She said it was with you." Father Thomas's gentle eyes sharpened with interest. "Did she now?" "She also said, 'Protect her,'" Logan continued, studying the priest's face for any reaction. "I believe she may have been referring to Leticia Alvarez." The priest was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the distant church spire as if seeking guidance. Finally, he sighed deeply. "Your mother came to me 12 years ago," he said quietly. "She was deeply troubled about something your father had done, something she had helped conceal out of loyalty and perhaps fear. She wrote a letter detailing everything, gave it to me for safekeeping, and asked that I only reveal its contents if something happened to her." Logan's heart hammered against his ribs. "And has something happened to her?" Father Thomas met his gaze evenly. "I believe your mother's request yesterday to change her will, followed immediately by an accident that left her unconscious, qualifies as something happening to her. Don't you?" The implication sent a chill down Logan's spine. "You think that this wasn't an accident?" "I think," Father Thomas said carefully, "that secrets have power, especially in families like yours, and people will go to extraordinary lengths to protect themselves when threatened with exposure." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. "Your mother made a copy of this letter for me to keep. The original, I believe, is the one she recently retrieved from Leticia." Logan stared at the envelope, suddenly afraid of its contents. "What does it say?" "It's not my place to tell you," Father Thomas replied, holding out the envelope. "These are your mother's words. She should be the one to explain, but in her absence, this is the best I can offer." With trembling hands, Logan accepted the letter. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably his mother's, elegant script spelling out, "In the event of my death or incapacitation." For Logan, the seal had never been broken. He opened it carefully, unfolding 2 pages of his mother's distinctive stationery. The date at the top, March 17, 2011, made him pause. 12 years ago, when his father was still alive and running the Whitmore empire with an iron fist. My dearest son, the letter began, if you are reading this, then I am no longer able to tell you this truth myself, and for that I am profoundly sorry. What follows will be difficult to accept, but you deserve to know what kind of man your father truly is, and what I have allowed to happen through my silence. Logan's eyes moved across the page, his mother's elegant handwriting detailing a horrifying truth. William Whitmore, the paragon of Texas business virtue, had fathered a child with a young Mexican immigrant who worked at one of his hotels, Leticia Alvarez. When Leticia became pregnant, William had paid her off, thinking the problem solved. But when Leticia changed her mind about the adoption he'd arranged and tried to keep her baby, William had used his influence to have the child declared abandoned due to Leticia's unstable living situation and placed with a wealthy family from his social circle. I knew what he had done, Margaret wrote, and I said nothing. I convinced myself it was for the best, that the child would have opportunities he never would with his real mother. But I've watched Leticia search for her son for years, working in our home, cleaning our floors, all while her heart was breaking for the child that was stolen from her. The guilt has become unbearable. Logan's hands shook so violently that the paper rattled. This can't be true, he whispered, looking up at Father Thomas with desperate eyes. My father wouldn't. Your father was a powerful man, Father Thomas said gently, and power, unchecked by compassion, can lead to terrible decisions. But what happened to the child? Logan asked, forcing himself to continue reading. The answer was in the final paragraph. The child was born with developmental challenges. The adoptive family, realizing this, quietly returned him to the state system 3 years later. By then, Leticia had established herself in Millbrook, working multiple jobs, including in our home. When I discovered what had happened to her son, I anonymously arranged for the boy to be reunited with her. William never knew. The child's name is Matthias. He is your half-brother, Logan, and I have carried this secret for too long. Logan stared at the letter, the words swimming before his eyes. Matthias, the quiet boy with the penetrating gaze who drew pictures of a young William Whitmore, was his half-brother. The realization struck him like a physical blow, forcing the air from his lungs. Does Leticia know that my mother was the one who reunited her with Matthias? He managed to ask. No, Father Thomas replied. Margaret wanted to protect her from William's potential retaliation. As far as Leticia knows, it was an anonymous social worker who discovered the connection. Logan folded the letter with mechanical precision, his mind racing to rearrange his entire understanding of his family. I need to talk to Leticia. First, Father Thomas said, placing a restraining hand on Logan's arm, you need to consider what this means. Your mother changed her will yesterday, presumably to include Leticia and Matthias. Shortly afterward, she had an accident that left her incapacitated. Who knew about the will change, Logan? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Logan thought of Ashley's strange behavior at the hospital, her insistence on being the one to collect Margaret's personal effects. I need to go, he said abruptly, standing. Thank you, Father. Logan, Father Thomas called as he turned to leave. Remember what your mother said. Protect her. Now that you know the truth, both Leticia and Matthias may be in danger. The drive to Leticia's apartment complex was a blur of automatic movements and racing thoughts. Logan parked haphazardly, taking the stairs to her unit 2 at a time. He pounded on the door with more force than he intended, his composure fraying with each second that passed. When Leticia finally opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, Logan blurted out the truth without preamble. Matthias is my half-brother, he said, watching her face pale with shock. My mother gave me the letter. She told me everything. The hospital corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before Logan as he made his way toward the ICU, his footsteps echoing against the sterile linoleum. 3 days had passed since his confrontation with Leticia. 3 days of revelations and reckonings that had left him reeling. Behind him walked Jenkins, his mother's longtime attorney, clutching a leather portfolio with whitened knuckles. The elderly lawyer's face was grave, his usual professional detachment replaced by a barely contained anger that had surprised Logan when they'd met in the hospital parking lot 20 minutes earlier. I should have come forward sooner, Jenkins had confessed, his voice low and strained. When I saw the bruising on your mother's temple, it didn't match with a simple fall. Now, as they approached Margaret's room, Logan steeled himself for what was to come. The doctors had reduced her sedation that morning, and though she hadn't fully regained consciousness, they were cautiously optimistic. Outside the door stood Ashley, immaculately dressed in a dove gray designer dress that somehow managed to look both appropriately somber and camera-ready. Her face was a perfect mask of concern as she scrolled through her phone. "Darling," she said, looking up with practiced surprise. "I thought you were meeting with the Palm Springs developers today." "I rescheduled," Logan replied, watching her face carefully. The past 3 days had taught him to look beyond Ashley's polished surface, to notice the calculation behind her eyes, the slight tension in her smile when things didn't go as planned. "Mr. Jenkins?" Ashley acknowledged the lawyer with a slight nod. "I didn't realize we had a meeting today." "We don't," Jenkins replied coolly. "I'm here at Margaret's request." A flicker of something, alarm perhaps, crossed Ashley's features before smoothing into polite confusion. "Her request? But she's been unconscious." "She regained consciousness briefly this morning," Logan explained, moving past Ashley toward the door. "The hospital called me directly." The private room was hushed, except for the steady beeping of monitors. Margaret looked smaller than ever against the white hospital bedding, her silver hair spread across the pillow like a halo. But when Logan entered, her eyes opened, clear and focused in a way they hadn't been in months. "Logan," she whispered, a weak smile touching her lips. "You found Father Thomas." "I did," he confirmed, taking her frail hand in his. "I know everything, Mom. About Leticia, about Matthias, about what Dad did." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I should have told you years ago I was a coward." "You were protecting them," Logan corrected gently. "And now it's my turn." He gestured for Jenkins to come forward. "Mr. Jenkins has something for you to sign." The attorney opened his portfolio and removed a document stamped with official seals. "I've brought the notary as you requested, Margaret. She's waiting outside." Margaret nodded, her gaze shifting to the doorway where Ashley stood watching, her body language tense despite her placid expression. "I'd like to speak to my family alone first," Margaret said, her voice gaining strength. "Ashley, would you mind giving us a few minutes?" Before Ashley could respond, the sharp click of heels announced the arrival of a hospital administrator, accompanied by the Millbrook sheriff and 2 uniformed officers. "Mr. Whitmore," the administrator said, "these officers need to speak with you and Ms. Turner regarding the circumstances of your mother's injury." Ashley's composure fractured visibly. "Officers? I don't understand." The sheriff, a weathered man in his 50s with shrewd eyes that had seen decades of small-town deceptions, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've received information that Mrs. Whitmore's injuries may not have been accidental. The hospital security cameras in the parking lot show you arriving at 11:42 p.m. that night, not at 12:15 a.m. as you stated in your initial report." "That's ridiculous," Ashley scoffed, though a flush crept up her neck. "I must have been mistaken about the time. It was a traumatic night." "We've also reviewed the house security footage," Logan said quietly. "The cameras in the East Wing hallway show you entering my mother's study at 11:52 p.m. You disabled the camera inside the room but not the one in the hallway." Ashley's eyes darted between Logan and the officers, her mind visibly calculating escape routes. "Logan, darling, you can't possibly think I would hurt Margaret. This is absurd." "Is it?" Jenkins interjected, removing another document from his portfolio. "Would it still be absurd if we mentioned that Margaret changed her will the day of her accident? A change that would recognize Leticia Alvarez and her son Matthias as legal beneficiaries of the Whitmore estate?" The color drained from Ashley's face. I never." She took a deep breath, visibly regrouping. "Even if that were true, why would I care? I'm marrying Logan. The Whitmore fortune will be mine regardless of some charitable inclusion of the help. Except," Logan said softly, "we're not getting married, Ashley. Not after what you did to my mother. Not after I found these." He held up his phone, displaying a series of screenshots, text messages between Ashley and a tabloid journalist, discussing the explosive Whitmore family scandal she was preparing to leak. "You were going to expose my family's secrets," Logan continued, his voice deadly calm, "but only after you'd secured your position through marriage. When my mother changed her will, you realized she might reveal everything before you were legally protected. You couldn't allow that." "You don't understand," Ashley hissed, her carefully constructed facade crumbling entirely. "Do you have any idea what it's like to work twice as hard as everyone else just to get half as far? I earned my place in this family. By lying? By nearly killing my mother?" Logan shook his head in disgust. "Officers, I'd like to press charges." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As the sheriff moved toward Ashley, she lunged past him toward Margaret's bed. Logan intercepted her, catching her arm before she could reach his mother. "This is your fault," Ashley screamed at Margaret, all pretense abandoned. "You and your precious cleaning lady. You think she deserves your money more than me? She's nothing. She's nobody." "That's where you're wrong," Margaret said calmly as the officers restrained the struggling Ashley. "Leticia Alvarez saved my life. Twice. Once when she stopped me from taking my own life after I discovered what William had done, and again when she protected me from you." She turned to Logan. "It's time for the reading." 2 hours later, the hospital conference room was filled with an unusual assembly. Logan sat beside Leticia, who held Matthias's hand tightly. The boy was unusually still, his dark eyes fixed on Margaret, who had insisted on being present despite her doctor's objections. She sat in a wheelchair, an IV pole beside her, but her expression was serene, almost triumphant. Jenkins cleared his throat and began to read from the document. "I, Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, being of sound mind, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." The legal language washed over them until Jenkins reached the critical section. "I leave 25% of my personal estate as well as full voting rights to my shares in Whitmore Resorts, to my son, Logan William Whitmore." Logan's head snapped up in surprise. "Only 25%, Jenkins continued. "I leave 25% of my personal estate to Leticia Maria Alvarez, in recognition of her loyalty, compassion, and the wrongs done to her by the Whitmore family." Leticia gasped, tears streaming down her face. "The remaining 50% of my estate I leave in trust for Matthias Antonio Alvarez Whitmore, to be administered by Logan Whitmore and Leticia Alvarez jointly until Matthias reaches the age of 25. Furthermore, I formally recognize Matthias Alvarez as a legal Whitmore heir, with all rights and privileges thereof." Absolute silence fell over the room. Matthias, sensing the significance of the moment, squeezed his mother's hand. "Additionally," Jenkins concluded, "I leave my personal residence in Millbrook to Leticia and Matthias Alvarez, with the hope that it will become a true home, filled with the love and honesty that it lacked during my lifetime." When Jenkins finished reading, Margaret spoke softly. "I failed you both," she said, looking between Leticia and Logan. "I allowed fear and loyalty to William to override what I knew was right. This can never fully make amends for that failure, but it's a start." Leticia stood and approached Margaret's wheelchair, kneeling before the older woman. "You saved my son," she whispered, taking Margaret's hands in hers. "You brought him back to me when I had lost all hope. There is nothing to forgive." Logan watched this exchange with a tumult of emotions. Anger at his father's betrayal, grief for the years of deception, but also a strange, tentative hope. His gaze fell on Matthias, who was watching him with those penetrating eyes that now seemed so obviously Whitmore eyes. "What happens now?" he asked, the question directed at no one in particular. Margaret smiled tiredly. "Now, my son, we begin again, as a real family." Outside the conference room, a journalist who had been tipped off by one of the hospital staff snapped a photo through the partially open blinds, an image that would circulate throughout Millbrook by nightfall. The wealthy heir, the cleaning lady, and the boy who connected them all, bound together by a truth finally brought to light. The autumn breeze swept across the Whitmore estate's meticulously manicured gardens, carrying the scent of late-blooming roses and freshly turned earth. 6 months had passed since Margaret's hospitalization, since the truth had come crashing down on the foundations of Logan's carefully constructed life. The mansion looked the same from the outside, stately, imposing, a monument to generations of Whitmore wealth and influence. But within its walls, everything had changed. Logan stood at the window of what had once been his father's study, watching as Leticia guided Matthias through the garden. The boy moved with careful, deliberate steps, stopping occasionally to examine a leaf or flower with intense concentration. At 13, he was tall for his age, his lanky frame beginning to fill out in a way that reminded Logan painfully of old photographs of his father as a young man. The study itself had been transformed. William Whitmore's hunting trophies and ostentatious displays of wealth had been removed, replaced by Matthias's artwork, intricate drawings and paintings that revealed how the boy saw the world in patterns and details that most people overlooked. The heavy mahogany desk remained, but the chair behind it was now occupied by a different kind of Whitmore. The board approved the funding, Elena announced as she entered the room, a tablet in her hands. Once Margaret's nurse, she had seamlessly transitioned to running the day-to-day operations of the Margaret Whitmore Foundation, established in the wake of the matriarch's passing 2 months earlier. Margaret's decline had been swift but peaceful, her final weeks spent in reconciliation and planning. She had died holding Leticia's hand, with Logan and Matthias at her bedside, a family pieced together from secrets and regrets, but a family nonetheless. "That's excellent news," Logan replied, turning from the window. "Have you told Leticia yet?" Elena shook her head. "I thought you might want to share that honor." Logan nodded and made his way through the mansion's wide corridors, now brightened by fresh paint and new artwork. The East Wing, once a seldom-used formal entertaining area, had been converted into a state-of-the-art therapy center for children with autism and other developmental challenges. The sound of children's laughter, once so foreign in these halls, now echoed regularly throughout the house. Outside, Logan approached Leticia and Matthias, who was now carefully arranging small stones in a complex spiral pattern at the edge of the garden. "The board approved the funding," Logan announced without preamble. "Construction on the San Antonio Center can begin next month." Leticia's face lit up, the premature lines around her eyes crinkling with joy. "That's wonderful. How many families will it serve?" "Initially 50, with capacity to expand to 100 within the first year," Logan replied. "And the scholarship program for the caregivers has been fully funded as well." Leticia's eyes filled with tears. In the months since Margaret's will reading, she had steadfastly refused to accept any personal wealth for herself, insisting instead that the money be used to establish support systems for families like hers, parents struggling to navigate the challenges of raising children with special needs without the resources that privilege provided. "She would be proud," Leticia said softly, her gaze drifting to the small memorial garden they had planted in Margaret's honor. "Of both of us." Logan nodded, his throat tightening. His relationship with Leticia remained complicated, bound by shared grief and responsibility rather than immediate warmth or connection. They were still learning how to be family, how to navigate the complex emotions that William Whitmore's actions had set in motion years before. Matthias, seemingly oblivious to the adults' conversation, had completed his stone spiral and now stood examining it with critical eyes. Without warning, he reached out and took Logan's hand, a gesture so unexpected that Logan froze, uncertain how to respond. Physical contact with the boy was rare, each instance a hard-won victory of trust. "Beautiful," Matthias said clearly, pointing to his creation with his free hand. Though his vocabulary had expanded in recent months with the help of specialized therapy, complete sentences remained elusive. Each word was precious, deliberate. "Yes," Logan agreed, carefully squeezing the boy's hand. "It's beautiful, Matthias." That evening, as Logan worked late in the study, a soft knock at the door interrupted his concentration. Leticia entered, carrying a cardboard box that had clearly been stored away for many years, its corners soft with age. "I found this in the attic," she explained, setting the box on the desk. "Margaret mentioned it once, but I think she forgot about it later, when her memory started failing." Logan opened the box carefully, revealing stacks of old photographs and documents. On top lay the missing page from the family album he'd discovered all those months ago. With trembling fingers, he removed it from its protective sleeve. The photograph showed a much younger Leticia, her face radiant despite the clear exhaustion in her eyes, holding a newborn with a shock of dark hair. William Whitmore stood beside them, his expression unreadable, a proprietary hand on Leticia's shoulder. In the corner, someone had written in faded ink, "Matthias Whitmore, St. Michael's Hospital, June 17, 2011. He kept a copy, Logan whispered, understanding dawning. "All these years he kept a record." Leticia nodded. "I think, in his own way, he couldn't quite let go, even though he did what he did." She hesitated, then added, "Your father was not a good man, Logan, but he wasn't entirely a monster either. People are more complicated than that." Logan stared at the photograph, searching for any sign that his father had felt something, remorse, affection, anything, for the child he had cast aside. The evidence was frustratingly ambiguous, like everything else about William Whitmore's legacy. "I've been thinking," Leticia said, interrupting his thoughts, "about the Whitmore name." Logan looked up, curious. When Margaret had left half her estate to Matthias, she had symbolically granted him the Whitmore surname, but Leticia had been hesitant to make the change official, protective of her son's identity. and wary of the baggage the name carried. "I think it's time," she continued. "Not for me. I'll always be Leticia Alvarez. But for Matthias, I think he should have the choice, to be a Whitmore by name as well as by blood." "Are you sure?" Logan asked, genuinely surprised. "After everything my father did?" Leticia's expression softened. "Your father isn't the only Whitmore anymore. There's you. There's the legacy Margaret tried to build in her final days. And there's Matthias himself. He'll define what being a Whitmore means for a new generation." She smiled sadly. "Besides, family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins. It's about who you choose to stand beside when life gets hard." The following week, Logan found himself in front of his father's grave for the first time since the funeral. The polished granite headstone gleamed in the morning sun. William Stanford Whitmore's name etched in imposing letters, followed by the dates of his birth and death, and the simple epitaph, "Businessman, philanthropist, father." The irony of that last word wasn't lost on Logan as he placed a single white rose on the grave, not out of love or respect, but as a symbol of closure. "I'll never understand why you did what you did," Logan said aloud, his voice carried away by the gentle breeze. "But I'm trying to build something better from what you left behind. Not for your sake, but for Matthias, for Leticia, for the family you refused to acknowledge." As he walked away from the cemetery, Logan's phone chimed with a message from Leticia. It was a photo of Matthias holding up his official name change documents, a rare smile lighting up his face. The caption read simply, "Matthias Antonio Alvarez Whitmore. Official today." Logan smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. William Whitmore's legacy of secrets and betrayal was being transformed day by day into something unexpected. A family bound not by obligation or appearance but by choice and compassion. As he drove back to the mansion, now as much Leticia and Matthias's home as his own, Logan remembered something his mother had written in her final letter. "Family isn't who puts you in the world. It's who holds your hand when the world knocks you down." Looking at the photo of his half-brother's smile, Logan finally understood what she had meant. The Whitmore saga reminds us that beneath the polished veneer of wealth and privilege often lie the deepest cracks of deception and pain. What would you have done in Logan's position? When everything you believed about your family shatters in an instant, would you have the courage to rebuild something more authentic from the broken pieces? Margaret Whitmore's final act wasn't just about distributing wealth. It was about healing a wound that had festered for 12 years in silence. Sometimes the greatest acts of love require us to dismantle the very foundations we've built our lives upon. Leticia's unwavering dedication to her son teaches us that true strength isn't measured by power or influence, but by the capacity to endure suffering while maintaining compassion. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that family is defined by love rather than obligation. And subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that challenge us to look beyond appearances. Remember, as Margaret wrote, "Family isn't who puts you in the world. It's who holds your hand when the world knocks you down." What hand will you hold today?